My name is Samuel Rhodes, and what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. But I need someone to know what really happened in those mines. I need the truth documented before they bury it deeper than the shafts themselves. I was broke. Not the kind of broke where you cut back on coffee and skip eating out. I was the kind of broke where debt collectors were calling at 3 in the morning, where my bank account hadn't seen 5 figures in over a decade, where a casino in Atlantic City had my name flagged in their system as a problem gambler with outstanding markers that weren't getting any smaller. I'm 42 years old. I should have had my life together by now, but divorce, bad investments, and an addiction to blackjack tables will strip away any illusions of stability you might have. My ex-wife cleaned me out legally in 2019. I should have learned my lesson then. Instead, I learned which casinos comped rooms and which ones were willing to extend credit to someone they thought would eventually hit big. The house always wins. It's not just a saying, it's a fundamental law of existence. By November, I was genuinely afraid. Not of losing my lifestyle, that ship had sailed years ago, but of actual consequences. There was a guy named Marcus who worked collection for Gino's people in Atlantic City. He'd shown up at my apartment twice. The second time, he'd broken my coffee table just to make a point. The message was clear. Pay up or face something worse. I worked in real estate back then, managing properties for a development company in Minneapolis. It paid decent money, but not Marcus scary money fast. I needed something immediate, something that paid well enough to make a dent in what I owed before the next visit. That's when I saw the job posting on a classified site I shouldn't have been on. A company called Northridge Mining Consortium was looking for a site supervisor for a remote operation in northern Minnesota. The position was temporary, 6 weeks, maybe 8 if things went well. The pay was $4,000 per week, with housing and meals provided. I did the math in my head. $24,000 in 6 weeks. Enough to buy myself time, enough to convince Marcus that I was serious about payment. The job itself sounded simple. Supervise the reopening of the Blackstone Jade Mine Complex, located in the Superior National Forest, about 40 miles from the Canadian border. The mine had been closed for almost 40 years. Northridge was a holding company that had acquired the mineral rights recently and wanted to assess whether reopening was financially viable. They needed someone on site to document the condition of the shafts, monitor for structural integrity issues, and verify inventory of equipment left behind. It wasn't glamorous, but it was money. I didn't ask many questions. That was my first mistake. The drive north took 4 hours. Minneapolis to Duluth, then cutting inland through increasingly dense forest. The landscape changed as I climbed elevation. The trees grew thicker, the sky darker, the sense of civilization fading like a radio signal, getting weaker the further you traveled. Around mile marker 47, I turned onto a Forest Service road that wasn't marked on my GPS. The truck bounced over ruts and rocks. Snow had started to fall, not heavily, but consistent, the kind that accumulates. The trees pressed in from both sides of the road. I could see maybe 30 feet in any direction before the forest became impenetrable white and shadow. I should have turned around. Part of me knew that even then, but I didn't. The Blackstone Mine Complex materialized out of the trees like something emerging from fog. There was a main building, a long structure of corrugated metal, windows boarded over. Behind it, I could see the headframe of the mine shaft, skeletal against the gray sky, various outbuildings scattered around. A fence, rusted and sagging, attempted to define the perimeter but had long since surrendered to entropy. A man was waiting on the porch of the main building. He was in his 60s, weathered dark as old leather, with a gray beard and eyes that looked like they'd seen things they wished they hadn't. "You Samuel?" he called out. "That's me. I'm Frank Delacroix. I run the supply operations for the company. You're early. Not expecting anyone until tomorrow." "Wanted to get here while the light was still decent," I said. "Roads are getting worse." Frank nodded like he understood something deeper in that statement. He probably did. Fair enough. Let me show you the quarters. You'll be staying in the dormitory building. It's heated, and there's a kitchen that works, though it's not fancy. We've got diesel generators running constantly to keep the power on. The main building is where you'll do your monitoring. There's equipment there, computers, communication systems. All of it works, mostly. You'll have a sat phone if the internet goes down. How often does it go down? I asked. Depends on the weather. This time of year, plan for it to go down regular. Frank picked up my duffel bag before I could. Come on, I'll show you around while we've still got daylight. The tour took 30 minutes. The dormitory building had a row of beds in a large room, a kitchen with a refrigerator and stove, a small dining area, and bathrooms with showers that Frank warned me had temperamental hot water. The main building contained offices, a communications center, and a vast room full of old mining equipment that had been cataloged and labeled. There's a vault downstairs, Frank said, records from when the mine was still operational. Your job includes creating a digital archive of those records. The company wants everything documented. Every shaft location, every piece of equipment, every worker log from the previous operation. The more complete your records, the more valuable the site becomes to potential investors. How long was it actually running? I asked. The Blackstone, opened in 1952, closed in 1984, 32 years of continuous operation. It was a significant site, employed about 40 men at its peak. Lots of jade came out of these shafts, very high-quality stone. Why'd it close? Frank looked at me in a way that suggested I'd asked the wrong question. Economics? He said finally. Cheaper sources opened up elsewhere. The company couldn't compete. They closed it down and sealed the shafts, took their equipment or left it. That was that. He didn't sound entirely convinced by his own explanation. There's something else you should know, Frank said as we walked back toward the main building. You'll be alone out here. I'm heading back south tonight. My job was to get the place operational and make sure the equipment worked. That's done. You're the only person on site now. The company will rotate in supplies every 2 weeks. Food, diesel, anything you need. But you'll be by yourself most of the time. How most? I asked. Complete isolation, no other staff, no visitors typically, just you and the forest and the equipment. Can you handle that? Could I? I thought about Marcus and the money. $40,000 was worth being alone for 6 weeks. Most people would have wanted a normal job with co-workers and structure. I needed isolation. I needed space to disappear where old debts couldn't reach me. I can handle it, I said. Frank looked at me for a long moment. You might be surprised at what you can handle, or not handle. Depends on the person. Some people, isolation doesn't bother them. Others. He trailed off. Anyway, you'll be fine. He wasn't being reassuring. He was being cautious. Frank left just before dark. He drove away in a company truck heading back toward civilization, leaving me alone with the buildings, the forest, and the mine. I ate a frozen dinner in the dormitory kitchen, drank 2 cans of beer from a cooler Frank had left, and tried to settle into one of the beds. It was old but clean, and the dormitory was warmer than I'd expected. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the metal roof, and snow was falling steadily. I should have felt peaceful. I was alone, paid well, in a place where the people who wanted to hurt me couldn't reach me. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Instead, I felt watched. It was a strange sensation. I lay in the darkness of the dormitory, listening to the wind, and couldn't shake the feeling that something outside was aware of me. Something was paying attention. I told myself it was paranoia. New place, isolation, stress. My nervous system was on high alert because I'd been afraid for months. This was just my brain trying to maintain threat awareness. Still, I didn't sleep well that first night. The next morning, I established a routine. Wake at 5:30 a.m., coffee in the kitchen, breakfast from the supplies Frank had left. By 7, I was in the main building reviewing the equipment manifests and starting to organize the files that needed to be digitized. The vault room was in the basement. It was cold and dry, which was good for preservation. Shelves lined every wall, filled with filing cabinets, boxes, and leather-bound logs. There were equipment inventories, production records, maintenance logs, and personnel files. Years of documentation about how the mine had operated. I started with the earliest records. January 1952. The opening logs were detailed and meticulous. Names of miners, shift schedules, depth measurements, shaft conditions. The handwriting was formal, careful. These were men who understood they were part of something significant. As I scanned documents and entered data, a picture emerged of what the mine had been. It wasn't just an extraction operation. It was a complex system of vertical and horizontal shafts, some reaching down over 2,000 feet. The jade deposits had been rich and extensive. The company had hired the best miners available and paid them well. This had been a profitable, serious operation. But as I moved through the records toward the 1980s, something changed. The entries became less frequent. Some months had gaps. The handwriting in the logs changed, less careful, more hurried. Notes started appearing in the margins. Comments like shaft 4 unstable and equipment failing and air quality concerns. The last series of logs from 1984 were almost frantic. The entries were sparse but urgent. Warnings about structural problems. Comments about the sounds from below and something wrong with shaft 6. The final entry was dated the 12th of March, 1984, and it simply said, "Closing operations, no further access to shaft 6, sealing complete, investigation inconclusive." Investigation of what, the document didn't say. I pulled the personnel file from 1984. The mine had been operating with only 12 miners at the end, down from the 40 at its peak. I recognized some of the names from the earlier records, loyal employees who'd stuck with the company through the decline. Others were new hires, brought in for the final months. There was a handwritten note clipped to the outside of the 1984 file. It was dated years later, in different ink, in a different hand. It said, "Do not reopen without full structural survey. Previous management's concerns about shaft 6 were never fully resolved. Recommend sealed status remains permanent." The note wasn't signed. I photographed everything, documented it all, and uploaded the files to the encrypted server the company had set up for me. But I saved the 1984 materials separately. Something about them felt important, felt like a warning being passed forward through time. That evening, I reviewed the site schematic. The mine had 7 major shafts plus a dozen smaller access shafts. 6 of the major shafts had coordinates and depth measurements documented. Shaft 6 had a coordinate, but the depth was listed as unknown and the final entry just said sealed. I decided to explore the mine itself the next day. Not to send the company had been clear that I wasn't to go underground, but I could examine the head frames and the sealed entrances. I could verify that the safety systems were in place. December 2nd, dawn clear and cold, maybe 15 degrees, with clear skies. I layered up, put on the heavy winter gear Frank had left for me, and grabbed a flashlight and a camera. The company wanted documentation of the site's condition. I'd give them documentation. The main mine entrance was at the center of the complex. The head frame rose maybe 40 feet, a skeletal structure of steel and wood. The entrance itself was sealed, a massive steel door with warning placards and radiation symbols. That was interesting. I didn't remember seeing anything about radiation in the documentation. I photographed the door and the seals. Everything looked professionally maintained. This wasn't an abandoned mine that had been left to decay. Someone had been checking on it. Someone had been maintaining the seals. I moved to the secondary entrances. There were 3 other headframe structures, each with sealed doors. They all looked similarly maintained. But as I circled the property, checking the perimeter, I noticed something odd. There were tracks in the snow around Shaft 6. They were fresh made sometime in the last few hours, after the snow had stopped falling early that morning. They circled the sealed entrance, approached it, then withdrew. The pattern was irregular. Not human footprints. Something larger, something that moved with a different gait. I photographed them, trying to maintain a scientific perspective. Animal, bear, maybe, though that seemed unlikely in early December. Moose, deer, the tracks were too large for either. I followed them around the perimeter. They didn't approach the other shafts, only shaft 6, and they seemed to be examining the seal, testing it, moving back and forth in front of the door in a way that suggested intelligence, purpose. The tracks led away from the mining complex and into the forest. I didn't follow them. Something about the idea of tracking whatever made them into the woods didn't appeal to me. Back at the dormitory, I reviewed the photos. The tracks were real. Whatever had made them was substantial. The prints were about the size of a human hand, but wider, and there seemed to be claw marks. The stride length suggested a larger animal, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall at the shoulder if it walked on 4 legs, or taller if it walked upright. I researched online. The internet was working that day. Most predators in northern Minnesota were bears, wolves, and coyotes. None of them left prints like the ones in my photos. The claw marks were wrong. The spacing was wrong. I found myself looking at folklore, Wendigo legends, Sasquatch sightings, dogman creatures supposedly seen in the upper Midwest. I was being stupid, getting caught up in cryptid nonsense. It was probably just a moose with an unusual gait, or a bear that hadn't properly hibernated yet. But the tracks had been specifically around Shaft 6, specifically examining the seal. That night, I heard something outside the dormitory, a sound like scraping, like something large moving through the snow and brush. It circled the building once and then stopped. I turned off all the lights and watched from a window. I couldn't see anything. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, but the forest was dark beyond the light's reach. Whatever it was, it had moved into that darkness. I didn't sleep that night either. By the second week, I had established a rhythm. Mornings were for documentation work, scanning files, entering data, organizing the digital archive. Afternoons were for site inspection and maintenance checks. Evenings were for isolation and growing paranoia. The tracks appeared every night, not always around Shaft 6, sometimes around the perimeter of the dormitory, sometimes near the main building, but they were there every single morning, pressed into the fresh snow. Something was regularly approaching the site. Something was aware of my presence. I documented it all. Photographs, measurements, notes about location and time. I told myself I was being scientific, objective. In reality, I was becoming obsessed. On December 14th, I found something else. Scat animal droppings just inside the fence line, about 30 yards from Shaft 6. It was unusual. Dark, heavily compressed, containing bone fragments. The volume suggested a large animal, definitely not a normal Minnesota predator. I photographed it, sampled it carefully, and bagged it for potential testing. I didn't submit the samples to the company, though. Something made me keep quiet about what I was finding. That same day, the power went out. The generators had been running continuously, humming in the background of my awareness. But around 3 p.m., they simply stopped. The lights went out. The hum that I'd gotten used to, that had become the baseline of my existence, was gone. I checked the generator shed, the fuel level was fine, the systems looked normal, but something had shut them down. The fuel line had been manually disconnected, which shouldn't have been possible. The connections were sealed and secured. I reconnected the fuel line, restarted the generators, and made a note in the maintenance log. Possible equipment failure. Possible sabotage. But sabotage by whom? I was the only person here. Unless I wasn't. The thought crept into my mind and settled like a parasite. What if Frank hadn't left? What if someone else was out here with me? What if they'd found my documentation, didn't like what I was recording, and wanted me to be aware that they were watching? I started keeping weapons near my bed, a heavy flashlight that could serve as a club, a kitchen knife I'd sharpened, a wooden handle from a piece of equipment that felt reassuring in my hand. That was when I realized how far I'd fallen. I was alone in the woods, afraid, convinced that I was being hunted by something, and I was rationalizing increasingly paranoid behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd come out here to escape the consequences of my own failures, and instead I was constructing a narrative where I was the victim of external threats. On December 18th, something genuinely terrifying happened. I was in the vault, scanning documents, when I heard a noise from above, a loud, resonant boom from deep below the building. It came from beneath the floor, from the shaft systems beneath the mine complex. The building shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Equipment shifted on shelves. I ran upstairs to the main building. The computers were still running, but something in their readings had changed. The seismic monitors equipment I hadn't even noticed when I arrived were showing activity. There had been a seismic event centered at the mine complex, registering just above 2 on the Richter scale, not a large earthquake by global standards, but significant for this region and impossible to explain naturally. Northern Minnesota isn't an active seismic zone. You don't get earthquakes here, unless something was causing them. I reviewed the historical data. Seismic monitors had been installed in 1982, right before the mine closed. There were readings from that period, multiple small earthquakes over the months before the closure. They increased in frequency and intensity in the weeks before the final shutdown. The last recorded reading was the 10th of March, 1984, an earthquake measuring 2.8. 2 days later, the mine was sealed. And now, with the mine supposedly dormant, sealed, and unvisited for nearly 40 years, we were having earthquakes again. I logged the event and sent a report to the company. The response came back within an hour from someone named Dr. Patterson. She wanted immediate notification of any further seismic activity. She wanted my readings on the structural integrity of the seals. She wanted to know about unusual activity in general. Her email had an undertone of worry that wasn't reassuring. That night, I made a decision. I was going to go underground. Not deep, just enough to see what might be causing the tremors. The company had said no underground exploration, but they hadn't anticipated earthquakes or animal tracks or fuel line disconnections. They hadn't anticipated that I would need to know what was really happening here. I prepared carefully. I gathered a headlamp, a satellite phone, extra batteries, a rope, and the kitchen knife. Probably useless, probably insane, but it made me feel prepared. The main mine entrance was sealed, but I'd found something during my inspections. Shaft 3, the secondary western entrance, had a seal that looked older. The metal had oxidized more. The bolts were corroded. With effort, I might be able to force it open. At 2 a.m. on December 19th, I began working on the seal. I used a pry bar from the equipment shed. The bolts turned eventually, rusted but yielding. After 30 minutes of work, the seal was loose enough that I could create an opening not huge, maybe 2 feet of gap at the top. I wedged a flashlight through and looked down. A tunnel descended into darkness. There were wooden supports, weathered but still standing. Old electric wiring ran along the walls. The air that came up was cold and thin, but not immediately dangerous. I could have backed away. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave the seal alone, to report the problem to the company, to evacuate the site. But I'd been alone too long. I'd been obsessing over mysteries too long. I needed to know what was down there. I pulled myself through the gap in the seal. The tunnel descended at about a 45-degree angle. The beam of my headlamp caught walls of dark stone streaked with lighter veins. Jade deposits? Probably. The economic reason for this mine's existence. The reason people had dug down and down and down into the earth. My boots crunched on gravel and debris. Water dripped somewhere, echoing off stone. The tunnel opened after about 50 yards, expanding into a larger shaft. Old mining equipment was still in place, hand trucks, picks, a rack of gear. A placard on one of the trucks read, Blackstone Mining Consortium, Est, 1952. The shaft descended further. I could see the support structures of a stairway, a wooden framework that had been constructed to allow miners to move up and down. Most of it was still intact, though some sections looked precarious. I should have turned around. I knew I should have turned around. I began descending the stairway. The deeper I went, the colder it became. My breath came in visible clouds. The walls around me changed color, from dark gray to deeper black, streaked with occasional veins of green where the jade ran through the bedrock. The stairway ended at a landing about 300 feet down. A horizontal tunnel branched off, and I could see the marks where equipment had been dragged. This was a working shaft, one of the major ones, where the actual mining had occurred. But there was something else, too. Something that made my heart rate spike. Fresh scratches on the tunnel walls. Deep gouges in the stone, as if something with massive claws had scraped along the surface. They were recent enough that stone dust was still visible in the grooves. Not old, not from decades ago. Recent, days, maybe. Something large had been down here, something with claws that could score bedrock. The tunnel continued for maybe 30 yards, then opened into a vast chamber. My flashlight couldn't light the entire space. The beam cut across darkness, catching the outline of mining equipment, the shape of equipment platforms, and something else. In the center of the chamber, there was a sealed shaft entrance, a steel door similar to the ones above, but this one was bent, warped, as if something immense had pressed against it, testing its strength. And in front of the door, scratched into the stone floor with enormous gouges, was a pattern. Not random, deliberate, a symbol or marker of some kind, something that communicated meaning. I approached slowly, my headlamp steady, trying to process what I was seeing. The scratches formed lines and curves, creating shapes that seemed almost deliberate in their complexity. That was when I heard it. A sound from behind the sealed door. Not the groan of metal or the creak of earth settlement. A sound that was almost like breathing, but deeper, more resonant. Like something massive was sleeping on the other side of that barrier, and it had just shifted position. I ran. I didn't think about it. I didn't plan it. Primal fear overrode every other instinct. I sprinted back the way I'd come, my headlamp bouncing wildly, my breath coming in gasps. I scrambled up the wooden stairway, expecting at every moment to hear the sound of pursuit, to feel claws closing around my leg. I made it back to the tunnel. The entrance with the gap in the seal was ahead, and I pulled myself through with desperation-fueled strength. Once I was outside, I began frantically pulling the seal back into place, replacing and tightening the bolts with shaking hands. It took me 20 minutes to secure the seal completely. The entire time, I expected something to emerge from the shaft behind me, but nothing did. I made it back to the dormitory and locked every door. I turned on every light. I sat in the kitchen with the knife in one hand and the satellite phone in the other, waiting for the sun to rise. When dawn came, I was calling the company. Dr. Patterson answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Mr. Rhodes, have there been additional seismic readings? I went into the mine, I said without preamble. I forced open one of the secondary seals and descended to the lower levels. There's something down there. Silence on the other end. Dr. Patterson? Mr. Rhodes, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You need to evacuate the site immediately. Pack only what you need and leave. Drive south and don't stop until you reach Duluth. I'm going to arrange extraction for you. What's down there? I asked. You need to leave. Now. This is non-negotiable. If I'm in danger, I need to understand. You're in more danger than you understand, Mr. Rhodes. And if it's been active, if you've made contact, if it's aware of your presence in a way it wasn't before," she stopped herself, "just go, please. Leave now." I packed my things. 20 minutes later, I was driving south, away from the mine, away from the forest, into the world of human civilization and electric lights. But something followed me. I made it to Duluth and checked into a chain hotel. I called Dr. Patterson from my room. She instructed me to stay put. A company representative would be coming to debrief me. Security protocols needed to be followed. "What is it?" I asked her directly. "What is in that mine?" "We don't know," she said. "Not precisely. We have theories, legends, descriptions from the previous site administrator, but no concrete answer." "Legends?" "Wendigo," she said quietly. "The Ojibwe legend of a creature born from cannibalism and isolation, a spirit of hunger that inhabits the wilderness. The original miners called it something different, a being that lived in the deep places, in the earth beneath civilization. The 17th century French fur traders had stories. The Salto people who lived in the region for hundreds of years before that had warnings about the deep caves and what shouldn't be disturbed." "You're talking about mythology," I said. "I'm talking about what 5 different groups of people independently reported encountering in that region before the mine was opened. After the mine was opened, 12 confirmed sightings by mine workers. And after the mine was sealed, 40 years of peace. Until you were asked to work there." The weight of that settled on me. "What does it want?" I asked. "We don't know that either. But when you went down into the mine, when you approached that sealed chamber, you may have communicated something to it. You may have made an offer unintentionally, a presence, something to hunt." She was right to be afraid. The company representative arrived the next day. A man named Victor Corsini, dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place in Duluth. He ordered room service, asked me to recount everything, and took notes in an old-fashioned notebook despite having a laptop open in front of him. "Did you take photographs?" he asked. "Yes, hundreds. Of the tracks, the site, the sealed shafts. I'll need copies." "What is the company going to do?" I asked. "We're going to do what we should have done 40 years ago. We're going to secure the site permanently, more security, deeper seals, and increased monitoring. And we're going to pay you the remainder of your contract in full, along with a significant bonus, in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. You're paying me to keep quiet about a monster in a mine. We're paying you to understand the complexity of the situation," Victor said. "The site has value, not just for jade, but for research purposes, academic purposes. We can't have freelance explorers and paranormal enthusiasts trying to access the mine based on internet rumors, so yes, we're paying for discretion." "And what happens to me?" I asked. "If it followed me, if it knows I'm out here? Did you feel followed?" I considered lying. I considered saying no, everything was fine, I was just paranoid and isolated. "Yes," I said. Victor set down his pen. "Then we'll need to take precautions. The creature, whatever it is, seems to be territorially bound to the mining complex and the surrounding forest. Moving away from the region should diminish its interest. But I can arrange protection if you're concerned." "What kind of protection?" "Security details, monitoring. The company has resources for situations like this." I didn't ask what other situations like this the company had dealt with. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. For 3 weeks, I was functionally imprisoned in that Duluth hotel. A security team, 3 men who rotated shifts, maintained a presence outside my room. I didn't leave except for supervised visits to nearby restaurants. I reviewed my photographs and prepared a detailed report about everything I'd seen and experienced. The company archived everything. Victor assured me it would all be kept confidential and secure. What I didn't tell anyone was that the thing was still following me. I would catch glimpses in my peripheral vision. Figures moving between buildings across the street. Shadows that moved against the light source. Footsteps in the hallway outside my room that stopped when I opened the door. Once, I saw it clearly. It was around midnight. I was looking out my hotel window, watching the street below. A shape moved between the streetlights. It was upright, definitely humanoid, but massive. 7 feet tall at least. The proportions were wrong, the arms too long, the shoulders too broad, and the face, when it turned toward my window for just a moment, was something I can't adequately describe. Pointed, hungry, aware. It looked directly at my window. I pulled the curtains closed. When I told the security team, they swept the area, found nothing, no tracks, no evidence that anything had been there. But their confidence wavered after that. They made calls. More personnel arrived. The hotel room became less a place of safety and more a temporary fortress. By Christmas, I was ready to lose my mind. The company decided it was time for me to move on. They arranged a house for me, private, in a secure location. They wouldn't tell me where until I arrived. Victor drove me personally, taking circuitous routes, stopping and starting, doing counter-surveillance checks. We ended up in Faribault, about 90 minutes south of Minneapolis. A quiet town, decent size, the kind of place where someone could disappear into normality. The house was nice, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, newly renovated. There was a security system installed, cameras, reinforced locks. The company covered the mortgage, utilities, everything. All I had to do was exist quietly and wait. For what? I asked Victor when he showed me the setup. For interest in the mind to fade, for the creature to forget you, for time to pass, and for this to become something that happened to you, rather than something that's happening to you. And if it doesn't fade, then we'll have a different conversation, Victor said. He left me there, alone again, in a new place with new walls, but the same underlying fear. Winter turned to spring. The snow melted, the days got longer. Life in Faribault was quiet, almost boring. I shopped at local stores, went to restaurants, tried to be invisible. The security cameras that had been installed were monitored remotely by company personnel, or so I was told. I didn't feel watched anymore. But I learned over those months that safety is often just the absence of knowledge. You can feel fine right up until the moment you realize that something is wrong. It started with the neighborhood animals. Dogs would bark at nothing, cats would disappear from porches, birds avoided my yard entirely. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention to everything now. I noticed when a woodpecker stopped coming to the feeder I'd installed. I noticed when the rabbits that had been visible at dawn stopped appearing. I noticed when the sound of insects died away from my backyard. The creatures were leaving, evacuating, the way animals do when they sense a predator is coming. In April, I found a print in the mud beside my house, human-sized roughly, but with claw marks. It had circled the house once before moving on. The company's response was to increase monitoring, more frequent security checks, phone calls asking me to confirm I was still alive. It was patronizing and terrifying in equal measure. By May, I couldn't sleep. I would lie in bed, listening to the house settle, waiting for the moment when something would break through the walls. I started sleeping with a loaded pistol on my nightstand, something I'd purchased illegally through a dealer who asked no questions. One night in mid-May, I heard it in the walls. Not breaking in, not trying to force entry, just moving through the space behind the drywall, circling the house from the inside, testing every corner, assessing every room. I called the security company. The team arrived within minutes, armed, professional. They searched the crawl space, the attic, every hidden cavity in the house. Found nothing. But they'd heard it too. The scratching sounds, the movement, the sense of something massive and intelligent moving through the infrastructure of the building. "We need to relocate you," the lead security officer told me. "This property isn't secure." "It's never going to be secure," I said. It doesn't care about walls. The officer didn't have a response to that. The company moved me to a new location. This time to Des Moines, 4 hours south. Another secure house, another setup, another attempt to buy safety with mortgage payments and hired guards. It followed me to Des Moines. I caught sight of it 3 times that summer. Once in a neighborhood at dusk, standing absolutely still in a yard 3 houses down, watching my house. Once in a supermarket parking lot, barely visible at the tree line, its shape wrong against the landscape, too large, too distinct. Once climbing the side of my new house at 2 in the morning, its claws finding purchase on the exterior walls, moving with deliberate purpose toward my bedroom window. That last time, the security team finally engaged it. The gunshots woke me. 12 rounds fired into the darkness, followed by the sound of something large moving through the surrounding houses. The thing fled into the neighborhood, and for a moment I heard the sounds of it knocking over fences, crashing through yards, creating chaos in its wake. The next morning I saw the blood on the side of my house where it had climbed. The bullets had hit it, wounded it, but not killed it. "It's not invulnerable," I told the security team leader, a woman named Keisha who'd been assigned to my case. "No," she said, "but it's not dying either. Whatever it is, bullets are inconvenience, not solution." That's when I understood the truth of my situation. The company couldn't protect me. Security systems couldn't protect me. Distance couldn't protect me. Because the thing that had followed me out of the mine in northern Minnesota wasn't bound by normal rules. It wasn't a creature that would eventually give up and return to its territory. It had learned my scent, my presence, my existence, and it wanted something from me that I didn't understand. I asked Keisha to arrange a meeting with Dr. Patterson. We did it via secure video call. Dr. Patterson looked like she hadn't slept in months. Dark circles, gray hair, the appearance of someone carrying an enormous weight. "What does it want?" I asked her directly. "We have theories," she said, which wasn't an answer. "Theories based on what?" "Based on the accounts of the original Ojibwe people, based on the records of the fur traders, based on the accounts of the 12 miners who encountered it before 1984. The Wendigo is fundamentally a creature of hunger. It's driven by an endless need to consume, to feed. When it was undisturbed in its deep caverns, it hibernated, it slept, it waited. But when you went into the mine, when you descended toward its territory, you offered it something it hadn't had in years: novelty, awareness of something outside its confined space. So it's hunting me because I woke it up? It's hunting you because you tasted freedom to it, Doctor," Patterson said. "You offered the possibility that there was food beyond the stone, that there were living things beyond the sealed doors. You are, essentially, a beacon, a promise." "How do I make it stop?" I asked. "You can't, not from where you are. But there's one option, one thing that might work." "What?" "You go back, you return to the mine, you go down to the sealed chamber where it dwells, and you make an offering." "An offering of what?" I said, though I already knew the answer. "Of yourself," she said quietly. "You end this by returning to the source, by closing the loop, by feeding the hunger that you awakened." There was a moment of absolute silence on the call. "You're asking me to commit suicide," I said. "I'm asking you to consider the alternative. The creature will continue to follow you. It will continue to test the boundaries of civilization. Eventually, it will breach them. It will kill others to get to you, innocent people, families, because you're a beacon that's calling it northward, and it will crash through whatever obstacles stand in its way. There has to be another option." "There isn't, Doctor," Patterson said. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rhodes. If there were, I would have offered it long ago. This creature is beyond science, beyond conventional weapons, beyond the usual frameworks we use to understand reality. The only thing that has ever stopped it is isolation. The only way to reestablish that isolation is to sever the connection you've created." I ended the call. I didn't speak to the company representatives. I didn't argue with Keisha or the security team. Instead, I waited for an opportunity and I ran. It wasn't hard. Security, no matter how good, has gaps. I made it to a bus station, paid cash for a ticket north, and began traveling back toward Minnesota. The creature knew I was coming. I could feel it. The presence that had become my constant companion grew stronger with each mile that carried me northward. It was almost excited. I reached the mine on a gray October afternoon, 6 months after I'd first fled. The autumn colors were brilliant, reds and golds against gray sky and dark stone. It would have been beautiful if it weren't so ominous. The site looked abandoned. No vehicles, no guards, no signs of human activity. But there were security cameras mounted on the buildings. Someone was watching. I didn't bother trying to hide. I walked directly to Shaft 3, the entrance I'd forced before. The seal had been reinforced since I'd departed. New bolts, fresh metal. But I had time. And more importantly, I had something motivating me that I didn't have before. I pried at the seal methodically. It took an hour, but eventually the bolts turned, and I created an opening large enough to squeeze through. The tunnel beyond was as I remembered it. Dark, descended, filled with the ghosts of mining operations past. I climbed into the opening and dropped down into the shaft. The descent was slower this time. I was moving with purpose, but also with dread. I knew what was waiting. I'd known since Dr. Patterson had made her suggestion. Some part of me had probably known since the moment I'd heard that sound behind the sealed door, that breathing, that awareness, that intelligence. The lower shaft, the massive chamber, the sealed inner door, its face marked with my desperate scratches from months ago. But something had changed. The seal was beginning to fail. Long cracks ran along the metal seams. The hinges were corroded, pulling away from the stone. Whatever was inside had been working on it, testing it, pushing against it. The barrier was failing. I approached the door. "I'm here," I called out, my voice echoing in the chamber. "I've come back." For a moment, nothing. Then a sound, a low rumble that came from deep within the earth, that resonated through the stone beneath my feet. The door shuddered, the cracks widened. I placed my hands on the door. It was cold, but beneath the cold I could feel heat, the warmth of something living behind the barrier. "Let me help," I said. I found a piece of equipment, a rusted hand truck from the mining equipment, and used it as a lever. I pried against the hinges, and the door began to give. Metal groaned, stone cracked, dust fell from the chamber ceiling. With a sound like a gunshot, the hinges gave way, and the door swung inward. What emerged from that chamber was something my mind refuses to fully retain. I can describe pieces of it. Enormous, easily 10 feet tall. Skeletal in some places, muscular in others. Fur, or possibly skin, the color of old bone, teeth like daggers, eyes that held an intelligence so vast and empty and hungry that looking into them was like looking into the void itself. It was beautiful in the way a hurricane is beautiful, in the way death itself might be beautiful if you had the capacity to appreciate it. It came toward me slowly, taking its time. There was no hurry. It had me. It had finally achieved what it had been hunting for across 6 months and hundreds of miles. I was here, alone, in the darkness, with no walls and no security and no possibility of escape. I didn't run. I'd come here to end this, and I meant it. The creature reached out a massive clawed hand. The claws extended further, each one the length of my hand. It could have torn me apart in seconds. Instead, it touched my face with surprising gentleness. And in that moment, I understood something. Dr. Patterson had been wrong. The creature didn't want to kill me. It wanted to consume me, yes, but not in the physical sense. It wanted to absorb me into itself, to take my essence, my awareness, my individuality, and add it to the vast hunger that drove it. It wanted to know what I had known. It wanted to see what I had seen. It wanted to exist in ways it had never existed before. It was lonely. In that moment of understanding, something changed. I stopped resisting. I opened myself mentally, spiritually, however you want to describe what happened to the creature. I let it in, and it let me in. In return, I saw through its eyes, I felt through its senses. For a moment that might have been seconds or might have been eternities, I was not Samuel Rhodes. I was something else. Something old and vast and hungry and desperate for connection. I understood why it had been sealed in that mine. The original inhabitants of the region hadn't sealed it away to protect themselves. They'd sealed it away to protect it. Because humans and creatures like this were never meant to coexist. The contact corrupts both, it transforms both, it changes the nature of existence itself. I understood that my death wasn't a sacrifice, it was a merger. And in my final moment of clarity, before I ceased to exist as a separate entity, I realized that I'd been looking for this my entire life. An escape from myself, an end to the constant noise of my own mind, a way out of the grinding disappointment of existence. The Wendigo gave me that. It gave me oblivion. Or maybe it gave me something more. Maybe it gave me transcendence. I don't know anymore. I'm not entirely sure I'm writing this, or if something is writing through my hands. I'm not entirely sure I died in that chamber, or if I'm still there, existing in some new form, some new state of being that encompasses both Samuel Rhodes and something infinitely older and hungrier. What I know is that this is my final message. This is my documentation of what happened. The mine is sealed again. The creature is quiescent. The company has increased security tenfold around the perimeter. But it will wake again. It will push against the barriers again. And next time, there might not be an offering to appease it. I found this document on the company's secure server. The header indicates it was written by Samuel Rhodes, timestamped the 15th of October, 2024. The security logs indicate no personnel entered the secure server to upload this document. The document simply appeared, despite multiple layers of encryption and protection. I am Dr. James Patterson, the company researcher who advised Mr. Rhodes to return to the mine. I wrote the previous chapters based on his communications with me, his electronic logs, and the documentary evidence he left behind. The epilogue is my own interpretation and confession. Samuel is gone. The mine is quiet. The creature has not moved against our barriers in 3 months since his descent. We've continued our research, our monitoring, our careful documentation of a phenomenon that science has no framework to understand. What troubles me most is not that Samuel is dead. I've made peace with that. I told him what needed to be done, and he did it. He was braver than any of the dozen men before him who encountered the thing in that mine. What troubles me is that I'm not entirely certain he is dead. The creature hasn't forgotten him. I can sense it through the monitors, through the seismic equipment, through the strange electromagnetic fluctuations we've been measuring. It holds on to him somehow. He's integrated into it, part of it, existing in some quantum state between alive and dead, individual and consumed. And sometimes, when I'm reviewing the seismic data late at night, I find myself wondering if Samuel is aware of this existence. If some essential part of him remains conscious, experiencing existence as something wholly other, fundamentally transformed. I wonder if he's afraid. I wonder if he's content. I wonder if he regrets his decision. I wonder, mostly, what happens when the creature finally breaks through the new seals we've installed. Because it will. Eventually, it will. The hunger is patient, but it is also inevitable. And the next time it emerges into the world of human civilization, there will be no Samuel Rhodes to offer himself as a feeding. There will only be a choice. Seal it away deeper, hunt it to extinction, or let it feed. I suspect we will choose the latter. Humans always do. I'm not Dr. Patterson. That entry was downloaded from the company server 3 days ago by someone with access levels I don't have. I shouldn't be writing this. I shouldn't have access to this file at all. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a night security operator for Northridge Mining Consortium. I've been assigned to monitor the Blackstone site for the past 8 months. I'm the one who watches the cameras, reviews the seismic data, logs the events that no one is supposed to know about. Today, something happened that requires documentation outside normal channels. At 3:47 a.m., the seismic equipment registered a spike. Not an earthquake. Something else. Something that looked like movement. Like something massive shifting position after a long period of dormancy. At 4:12 a.m., the primary seal on the main entrance showed a pressure increase. Not a breach, not yet, but increased pressure from within the chamber. At 4:34 a.m., I called Dr. Patterson. She didn't answer. I called security. They initiated emergency protocols. But at 4:51 a.m., before any intervention could occur, the pressure decreased, the seismic activity stopped, the equipment normalized, whatever had stirred returned to sleep. Dr. Patterson called me back at 5:30 a.m. When I told her what had happened, there was a long silence. "The creature is preparing," she said finally. "It's getting ready. Samuel Rhodes bought us time, but only time. The clock is counting down to something, to a moment when the hunger becomes too great to ignore." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that in the next few weeks or months or years, I don't know how long, we have the Wendigo will push against the seals with intention. It will test them systematically. And if they hold, it will find another way. It will excavate. It will search for passages that lead to the surface. It will work the problem until it finds a solution. And then we'll discover whether anything can stop something that has already ceased to be bound by the normal rules of existence." I've sent this document to a secure external server, outside company channels. If you're reading this, then I've decided that the truth is more important than my employment contract or my financial security. The Wendigo is real. It's in the Blackstone mine north of the Canadian border in the Superior National Forest, and it's waking up. I don't know what happens next, but I know that Samuel Rhodes understood something crucial when he went into those dark places. He understood that some mysteries are only solved through total immersion. Some hungers are only satisfied through total surrender. I'm afraid of what comes next, but I'm also certain that it's coming, and I think, somewhere in the vast darkness beneath the earth, Samuel Rhodes is waiting for it too.